Podcasting from a secret location deep inside the political colossus. This is Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance.
Part of the beauty of me is that I'm very rich. Let me tell you, I'm a really smart guy.
What's your name again? John Miller. And you work with Canada? Yes, that's correct.
Oh my God, they've got a madman on their hands.
We will have no truce nor parley with you or the grisly gang who work your wicked will. You do your worst, and we will do our best.
We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the walls. The chair is against the walls.
This is Radio Free GOP with your host, Mike Murphy.
3 weeks out and Donald Trump in a spiral. Plus, is there an emerging Hillary hedge in the Senate races? What's going to happen there? And our interview with the ringmaster of the circus, Mark McKinnon. All here on Radio Free GOP.
He used to have a big career, but now he's had enough. Podcasting's like therapy. His shrink says it's great stuff. Radio Free GOP.
Greetings from a new undisclosed location, this time on the East Coast, on the run, but broadcasting the Radio Free GOP gospel of truth. And right now, despair. Oh, what a depressing election. There's never been one this depressing. It was a kind of a depressing week in this election. Let's do a quick, painful review and then go on to the interesting question of the Senate races. Well, Trump yesterday, we're recording this on Tuesday, so Monday, he went to Wisconsin. Now, why? We being the Republicans, we've not won the presidential race in Wisconsin since 1984. But Trump had to go there. Why? To rent a hall and sample the local variety of dumbass America and whine and complain about Paul Ryan being mean to him. Unbelievable. What a toddler we have running for president of the United States. Totally oblivious to the fact that most of his trouble he has created. Anyway, so he got his people in a room and he whined about Ryan and he left. Meanwhile, the serious business of the Wisconsin Senate race rolled along with no Trump involvement. Why? Because the candidate won't be seen with him, because he's Trump and he's drowning. The polls have declined. The Real Clear average of Trump polling now looks so bad, I mistook it for Trump's credit rating. He's really pushing 8 points down right now. The average is a little better than that, but if you take out the outliers, there are even polls that show minus 11, new polls. It's unbelievable. It is like, as I've said before, this guy was built in a lab to lose the campaign. And he's doing it. He's becoming America's biggest loser. In fact, he's doubling down more of the crazy Breitbart stuff on the eve of the debate. It is hard to fathom. It is what it is. Now, his allies are rushing to his defense, the few of them, although I saw Newt was saying, oh, he's not listening to me anymore. Melania Trump gave an interview and explained it was all just boys' talk about the women and gave us the reassuring thought that as First Lady, she would lead a crusade against vulgarity and incivility on social media. That's like Eva Braun saying she was going to take on anti-Semitism. She ought to check her husband's Twitter feed. And I also got a whiff in her comments about, he won't listen to me. I mean, all the rats are jumping from this ship, with the exception of that core group around him that are in the resentment business, the resentment commerce department. They don't care about winning or losing. They're trying to think of the next caper, the next scam. And it'll come, but we'll leave that depressing thought for later. So Trump's in a spiral, and he's heading for the next debate. Now, this will be a Chris Wallace debate, which means some tough questions. That's a good thing. Boy, does Hillary deserve them. Can you imagine the alternate universe we could be in with a credible Republican, a Jeb Bush or a John Kasich, and the problems Hillary's had that are coming out in all these emails? Yeah, I know there's the Russian dimension, but the emails are pretty troubling. This new one about the State Department pressuring the FBI to reclassify. Oh, what a campaign it would be. She would be up to her neck in her troubles. Instead, for all the insults and indignities of running a campaign against Donald Trump, she has won the biggest lottery ticket in the history of politics. It is unbelievable because thanks to Trump, she can't lose. She ought to lose in many ways, but not to Trump. Trump is the savior. Trump is the magic bean that makes Hillary the only credible choice. What a depressing way to win an election, but a pretty surefire one. So we're rattling on, 3 weeks to go. one more debate, which I think people may not even tune into. My guess it has lower ratings than the other presidential debates, not vice president low, but a bit lower, because everything's kind of baked in now. We know what the Trump crazy looks like. We know she half-heartedly can kind of respond. We know she'll pass knows the issues, sobriety test better than he will. Cornered and feral the way he is now, God knows, maybe the train wreck element will attract viewers, but it's going to be more thin gruel. A presidential debate you can't let your kids watch. How is that for depressing? Now, the interesting thing going on in the campaign, I will say, are the Senate races. The Republicans are defending their Senate majority, and a lot of their incumbents are running in tough swing states or even Democratic states. Yet, the latest polling, which is not the whole world, got to be careful. Polls tell you a lot about what happened last week, not necessarily what's going to happen next week. And the last 2 weeks of a presidential is where voters kind of come home. But that said, we Repubs are doing better than people expected. There are two theories on this. The traditional theory on the Senate races that has been true in the past is when you analyze them, you look at two things: top of ticket performance in a presidential year and the history of the state on a partisan basis. So the theory would be in a Democratic year with a credible Democratic candidate, the Democratic states vote Democratic and the Republican incumbents need a huge outlier performance to survive. Most of them wouldn't, or vice versa in Republican states in a Republican year. Well, this year, of course, we've got the Orange Menace at the top of the ticket, so it's a train wreck. The only discussion is how bad. And the Democratic states still have that Democratic tendency, in some places even more than before. So under that traditional analysis, we lose the Senate. Now, what's happened, though, the new theory, which I think is interesting, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, is that with all the information people can have now between the internet and cable television blaring around the clock, multiple channels, they know a lot. They know a lot of subtext. They know a lot of trivia, frankly, but they know a lot. So it's easier to be a ticket splitter. It's easier to understand that, wait a minute, my local guy is not for Trump or is totally uncomfortable with him. I don't have to punish him or her for Trump's sins. Now, add to that the fact that people don't like Hillary Clinton. Maybe there's a hedge vote. Maybe the Hillary hedge is the motor, and we will have a lot more of what is called ticket splitting, where people vote for one party for president and another party for Senate, plus the power of incumbency in a few places. So if you look at the polling data in the Senate races from Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson was supposed to be dead, but now incredible polling, he's only 2 points behind, essentially tied, still a tough state. Pennsylvania, another Democratic state where Pat Toomey is running well ahead of Trump, essentially in a tied race against a pretty weak Democratic candidate. In New Hampshire, of Kelly Ayotte, who's probably doing the best of these people trying to survive purple states. In Nevada, where Congressman Joe Heck is making a spirited challenge in another blue state, and the polls show it fairly close, although he's a bit behind. In Ohio, where Rob Portman is broken through, and the one state where Trump is narrowly ahead or tied, he used to be more ahead, so a Republican trend there. In the Republican state of Missouri, a tough race there. Roy Blunt is ahead, but it's tight. And in North Carolina, Richard Burr is ahead, but not by much, really in the margin of error. Florida, Marco Rubio is ahead by a couple of points. So the Senate outlook, if you look at the polling, looks like we could have a lot of ticket splitting, and the Republicans actually have a hope to hang on to the Senate. They're sure working hard. My friends at the Senate committee are working. The independent expenditures are working hard. We're in the hunt. Now, that said, if you put a gun to my head, I would say my brain tells me, based on historical numbers, which I tend to believe in, we're probably going to lose the Senate. But my gut tells me we're a lot more in the hunt than I thought we'd be. So it will be interesting to see. Will hedging Hillary, the Hillary hedge, you can tell I'm in love with this alliteration, will that be the real story of the Senate elections? Now, one last point about that. I think it's actually a bit in Hillary's interest to not win the Senate. Oh, I hear all the Democrats switching off their computers now. But hear me out. If Chuck Schumer is the new majority leader because the Democratic Party wins the Senate, then Hillary's going to spend all her time fighting off the ascendant loony left, Mr. Bernard Sanders, and especially Senator/Tavares Elizabeth Warren. She'll be an inner party fighting all the time. It'll be hard to go to the center. But if the Republicans hang on to the Senate by one vote, then the Senate is up for negotiation grabs. Deals will be able to be made. And when deals are made, things get done. It gives Hillary in some ways more moving room. Now, the hardcore partisans will say, that's crazy. We want the Senate so we can confirm our justices, confirm our people, staff our administration with anybody who needs a confirmation, judges, etc., the way we want. But to do big deals on big stuff, Senate sitting on the knife edge with the Democrats in a 1 or 2 vote minority, not such a bad scenario. We'll see. Again, gun to my head guess, they win the Senate. But we Republicans are really in the hunt, which is pretty interesting. Okay, now the House. There's been a lot of buzz about the House flipping. Not going to happen. There are only about 35, 36 House seats that are really ever in play. We have too much redistricting. Everybody's kind of locked into these safe districts. Not a good thing. We ought to do something about that. But if you look at the 36 we have, it's just impossible for a full Democratic sweep. You have local factors and things like that. Now, with a horrible Trump top of the ticket scenario, which is becoming more icily likely every day, we're going to lose seats. The question is how many. I think the minute you start hearing the word teen in the number, it gets more troubling. 13, 14, bad, not terrible. 16, 17, 18 gets really bad. Why? Because the people who are losing are the knife and fork eaters, the more reasonable among us, which means the hardcore remains with their conspiratorial plots and total opposition mentality that could box Speaker Ryan in, who would like to do good things for America with a conservative reform twist. So his speakership is going to be affected by caucus politics, and the more people we lose, the trickier his caucus politics become. So will we hold the House? I believe our chances of losing the House are literally about 1 in 50, maybe 1 in 40, even with the Trump meltdown. But it'll get thinner. And if it gets really thin, it'll be very hard to govern our caucus, and God knows what intrigue that'll bring. So the stakes couldn't be higher. It's going to come down to ticket splitters and what they decide to do in the House with a few of those races that are still up for grabs, and particularly in the U.S. Senate. That'll be the interesting story on election night, beyond Trump, sobbing into a microphone and plotting a coup. That's the thought I want to end on. American politics is rough and ready, and we do a lot of tough stuff. That's the nature of free speech in a vibrant democracy. But there's always been one rule. We don't call into question the legitimacy of our system with unsubstantiated talk about fixed elections, things are rigged, democracy doesn't work. Now, you can make arguments that our democracy doesn't represent everybody, there's too much money in it, there are systemic critiques that are legitimate. But saying our system is rigged and we cheat, and you cannot believe the legitimacy of an American election, that is throwing acid into the face of the most vibrant and powerful democracy in the world. And it is damn close to treason. It's the most disgusting thing Trump has done. It's classic demagogic behavior, and it's why he deserves the contempt of every American, every voter, and particularly every Republican elected official. We've got this asset in our House, and again, we're making a list and checking it twice of who had the guts to say something about it. And I would say, as a proud Republican who has spent a professional career beating Democrats proudly, it's disgusting to me that so few people are standing up on this. More are every day, but not enough. Okay, no more sermon. That's not why you listen. But this is an honesty podcast, and I'm always going to call it the way I see it. Now it's time to sell some beans and do a little commerce to pay the bills.
Mike Murphy, podcasting sanity, Radio Free GOP.
We love them. America loves them. Who am I talking about? Our first advertiser, the Private Equity Fundcast. They've been at it 3 years now. And wait, what? You're not a listener? Oh my goodness. Let me give you the pitch on why you ought to listen. The Private Equity Fundcast is the only weekly podcast that goes behind the scenes of the global private equity industry. Your guides, your Sherpas, two great guys who host the podcast, Jim Milbury and Devin Matthews. They're industry veterans, and they are not scared to tell you how things really work, much like we try to do here about politics at Radio Free GOP. They tell you their secrets to buying, building, and selling companies, and they have done a ton of it. They take a refreshingly honest, and they're funny, look at how the industry works and how they execute business inside their Chicago-based firm, Parker Gale Capital. You'll hear about the art and science of the letter of intent, a key thing, and how to get a CEO job at a private equity-owned company. There is nothing else like the Private Equity Fundcast when it comes to inside baseball talk in a funny, interesting way, all about private equity. So if private equity touches your life, or you work for companies that might be owned by private equity, or you might even sell services to them as a lawyer, accountant, or investment banker, for any of those reasons, you should be listening to the Private Equity Fundcast. You can subscribe easily on iTunes or Google Play. One more time, that is the Private Equity Fundcast. We also get a little distribution help here at Radio Free GOP from my friends at Ricochet.com, the smartest and most civil center-right community on the web. No trolls, they guarantee it. You become a member, let your voice be heard, and you listen to all kinds of great podcasts. They produce like 9 or 10 of them, and they distribute ours all for just $5 a month. And Radio Free GOP listeners get their first month free. So just go to ricochet.com/join. That's ricochet.com/join and sign up today. And while you're so busy on the internet, make sure you go to our website, radiofreegop.com, our website where you can get the cool merch we sell. We have our Orange Menace Scary t-shirt, a collector's item, and our original t-shirt. We're running low, by the way. This is your time to get some with the upside-down Jack Frost Elephant in Distress, our logo. You can also communicate with us. Tell us what you think. Give us notes, hints, criticism, insults, anything you got at comment@radiofreegop.com. Now, in the Commerce Department, we have a little button there you can click, which will lead you to Amazon.com. So for all your Amazon shopping needs, if you click that button on our website first, we get our beak wet. We get a little taste, and your price remains the same. Also, something that's proving to be popular and very helpful is our PayPal button. You click that thing, and you can make a one-time donation of a couple shekels, or you can subscribe every month. That really helps us keep the lights on here. The money that comes in there, we put back into the podcast. So I'll even make an offer. If we can get a little more money coming in through PayPal, we will take less ads. That's right. That's the deal. More PayPal, less advertising. It's up to you. We have cost we must cover. Thank you for your support. Last week was the highest rated in terms of downloads podcast we've ever had. We've been growing every week. It is due to you, those wonderful ratings you put up on iTunes, which really, really help, and the way you spread the word. So thank you, dear listeners. I appreciate it. And now, with that, let's get back to the podcast.
Radio Free GOP.
So, do you like the circus? No. I'm not talking about moldy peanuts and alcoholic clowns. I mean The Circus on Showtime, the great TV show that takes you behind the scenes of this crazy campaign with a nifty cinema verite style. Well, with us today in the interview is the guy who thought it all up, Mark McKinnon, a good old friend of mine, great consultant, started out as a Democrat, became a Republican, worked for George W. Bush. You're going to hear all about his experiences, his adventures, how the circus is put together every week, and Mark's take on this crazy, crazy campaign. So let's go to our interview with the one and only Mark McKinnon.
It's time to ask some questions and go behind the scenes. Here's our latest interview. We'll try to keep it clean. Radio Free GOP.
We're here with my good friend and famed Republican and at one time Democratic media consultant and all-around good guy, Mark McKinnon. Mark, thank you for doing Radio Free GOP.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks, Mike.
Exactly. We're going to be auctioning off that toaster in a minute, and we have Captain Bob with the helicopter update. But that was my first internship gig at WWJ News Radio in Detroit, Michigan. I remember they used to have the bowl of apples, the old school radio thing, because you'd bite an apple to clear up your voice. Let me start how I always start with the question, how did you get into this racket?
Accidentally. I was a musician, a songwriter. I hitchhiked to Nashville and dropped out. I ran away from home in the middle of high school, ended up in Nashville banging around, and then played at the Kerrville Folk Festival in Texas, and then ended up in Austin, Texas, playing music for a while, until the point where I looked around and realized that the trajectory that I was on, I was going to be the second act at the Pflugerville Holiday Inn when I was 50. and so I just said, well, there's a university here. I always, thought I'd at least give that a shot. I did that. I always loved to write. The reason I love music is I loved writing. And so I got into journalism, got into the school paper and started covering local politics. And I loved it. I always loved politics. I loved writing. So I wrote about politics. And then a local state senator who was very popular ran for the United States Senate. And I went over and volunteered. And then I saw that they needed somebody to do data input for $5 an hour, which was twice the money I'd ever made in my life, which I thought was incredible. So I did that. And then about 2 weeks in, this guy named Paul Bagala walked down to the basement and he said, hey, this is Mark McKinnon. He was the editor of the Daily Texan. You're press secretary. So this was the Lloyd Doggett campaign in 1984 against Phil Gramm for the U.S. Senate, which was at James Carville first big race and Paul's first race. A lot of folks that we know kind of earned their stripes on that campaign. And then we won a very exciting primary and then got crushed in the Reagan election. then I thought, well, that's the end of my career, I assume. And then that's where I discovered you can fail upwards in politics. And I got a call from the governor's office and went to work for the governor. And that's when I started working with, Ray Strother and these media guys were working on the campaign. And I thought, wow, that's what I really love. I love the media stuff, kind of the storytelling, writing, creative part of the campaign, which is what I like to do. So then I got that bug. And then Mark White lost his reelection. That was the governor I went to work for. And then I had a couple different options, but somebody said, if you think you know anything about politics, go to Louisiana and get your PhD. And I did that and had a great race with this guy named Buddy Roemer. And then I went on to work for David Sawyer in New York, who you probably remember.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know. You were at Sawyer Miller. I did not know that.
Yeah, in the 80s. And that's kind of where I learned the biz.
Wow. Now, I've got to go backward quickly. I want to hear the Nashville stories. I used to live on Music Row there when I was working for Lamar Alexander.
You're kidding. I lived right on Music Row. I lived on 17th Avenue South.
Well, remember that little condo building? It was about 9 stories tall, that kind of 70s building there. I had a little apartment down there when I was working for Lamar. It was great.
Oh, my Christ. We lived like 2 blocks from each other.
And, I remember there'd be guys walking the guitar with the demo arrangements up and down those little townhouses there, or little standalone houses where the song publishing companies were pitching their songs. It was kind of an amazing community. Wow.
That was me. Yep.
That must have been fun. Tell me a little bit about that.
It was a ton of fun. It's the best time I had in my life. It was just a great chapter. Just by sheer, an accident, not by design, but Chris Christopherson heard a band that I had in Colorado, and he liked us, not because we were really very good. He was kind of like, dogs standing up or something. We were really young, and we wrote original music. And so he got some producers from Nashville and came out to Colorado where I lived and did some demo tapes trying to get us a record deal, which, no surprise, never happened. But because with him in the studio, and I thought, well, Christ, I'm not going back to school now with all these boring, people here in Denver, Colorado. I want to go see the big lights, So I ran away. I ran away from home and ended up living in Christopherson's apartment. He was very generous. So, he's an amazing guy. He was a great mentor and very generous and let me kind of hang around the publishing house and, play with the tape recorders and stuff. And so I did that for a while until I bounced over to Texas. But God, it was a ton of fun hanging out with him, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I remember all these choppy musicians would come because we were kind of integrated into that crowd. There was a lot of love for Lamar in '95 when he ran. And, Chet Atkins, all these guys would come by. And I remember once Lamar called me up and said, hey, for the big fundraiser, I'm going to do a double piano thing with Ray Stevens. And I thought, Ray Stevens, a novelty guy? He goes, yeah, he's more than that. Come with me in an hour. We're going to go practice. You might enjoy it. So we go. Ray had, the studio. He'd been a producer, too. And I'm still thinking of Ahab the Arab and everything. And look, I got nothing against Commerce. He sold a lot of it. But we sit down, and there are 2 pianos there, and Ray starts playing a Chopin piece, and then Lamar plays it, and they get in this dueling banjos contest.
Oh, my God.
And Lamar is a good piano player, and Ray smokes him in a classical piece. He'd gone to Georgia on a full, piano ride and everything, and it was just interesting, the multi-dimensions to that music business down there.
That's really interesting. That's a great story.
Who are a few of your musical heroes?
I mean, I was early 60s, so I was really big into that kind of early folk era, I know this goes way back, like the Kingston Trio and Pete Seeger. And, if you saw that, the Coen Brothers movie, you remember the one that you did recently about that early folk scene?
Oh, yeah. I'm blanking on Lou and Davis. Right.
Yeah, that was the era that I was in. So that, I love the Byrds and all that. Jackson Browne was a big, inspiration early on as a songwriter guy. And
I was a big Dave Von Ronk fan, so I totally get this.
That's perfect. I mean, Von Ronk is exactly that era of music that I grew up. Judy Collins was my babysitter when I was a kid, so
wow,
that's the kind of stuff I grew up on.
From the middle eight to now the campaign advertising. It's incredible. That's quite a journey. So let's take you back into politics. So there you are. You're at Sawyer Miller, and then what happens? Because eventually you wind up with Governor George W. Bush, and he seduced you into the Republican Party, at least for a while.
Well, the cool thing about Sawyer was that he was older at the time, and so he'd sort of he'd get these campaigns, and then of course he didn't want to work on them, and he'd turn them over to the young sprout intern guy, me, and just threw me right in the deep end. And as you may recall, he and Bob Squire were kind of the first guys to really export American-style campaigns around the globe, and so I got to go to like Africa and South America, and do this crisis is our brand thing, and learned a ton. But then I was in New York, but a guy named Roy Spence, who you may remember.
Sure. Yeah.
He was down in Texas, and he had been in the biz, but he just started making too much money in regular advertising, and I think the Mondale campaign had kind of killed his career. I think he came up with the cautious taxes line, and so
but he was originally a straight advertising guy, right?
Yes,
seem to remember
that's right.
He had a pretty big
that's
career.
Right. But he was he's a really talented guy, and he was very successful. But he just said, I'm getting out of the political biz, which to me opened up it created an opening for me. So I went down there and kind of set up shop in Texas, did Ann Richards' campaign, among others down in a lot of stuff from Texas, Southwest kind of campaigns. And then I got into the public affairs business with Jack Martin and this company called Public Strategies. Was doing that, kind of happy doing that, stepped out of politics during the 92 cycle, which is when George W. Bush ran against Ann Richards. This is all kind of just odd coincidences, because then, of course, had I worked for her reelect, things would have been different. But then in the interim, George W. Bush got elected. And then I had gotten really I'd been sort of obsessed by education issues and charter schools. And there was this charter movement I was really interested in. I did kind of like a film demo, and thought the charter school movement was a really good idea. And then through another set of circumstances, I ended up like having dinner with George W. Bush and some other colleagues, and I showed him this film, and then he got onto the charter movement. But more than that, we kind of clicked just kind of socially. He had two girls about my girl's age, and he liked to run, and I liked to run, so we started running together, and we just started kind of hanging out. And then he got into a legal situation with the media guy that he had at the time, Don Sipple. And Sipple, it was just kind of a messy legal situation with an alleged domestic abuse allegation. And anyway,
it was a divorce that was all fought out. And then I remember there was press about allegedly he had like two. Anyway, it was really messy. So they let him out of the campaign probably because it became a problem.
Right. And they just needed a new guy. And somebody who I was close to, the Lieutenant Governor, Bob Bullock, who was a mentor to George W. Bush. They kind of governed in a very bipartisan fashion and really liked each other a lot.
Just a quick interjection. I think I first met you when I was working for Rob Mosbacher against Bullock, and I remember you were like doing a mayor's race. Was it Lanier for Houston?
Yep.
Anyway, that's I think when
Bob
we first
Lanier,
met.
yeah.
Bob Lanier.
Yeah, that's one of the first times I think I met you, because we pitched against each other, and I think I saw you like coming out of the conference room or something.
That's right. Yeah, and then we became pals, and I met Bob Lanier. I remember his charming daughter Holly too. I remember I spent a lot of time in Texas back then.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
Good
didn't mean to interrupt. So Bullock is their mentoring.
No, so he kind of came up with this notion. Said, well, why don't you ask McKinnon to do this? And so Bush talked to Rove and Karen Hughes and a few others, and I kind of went and talked to them, and so an offer was extended, and it was awkward for me at the time. I'd been in Democratic politics most of my life. I mean, professionally, the work that I'd done was in Democratic politics, but it was Texas, and I'd grown a little older and a little more conservative. And remember, before George W. Bush was on the scene in 1990. Well, let me back up. Before George W. Bush came on the scene, Texas was a two-party state in the sense that there was the Democratic Party and the Conservative Democratic Party. There was no Republican Party. In 1990, when Ann Richards was elected, there's 28 statewide offices in Texas. All 28 were Democrats. 8 years later, when George W. Bush was reelected in 1998, all 28 were Republicans. So when people in Texas, when conservative Democrats had an option, they all became Republicans. So I crossed that bridge, and this is kind of one of those things where I realized that what really matters, I mean, you want to have some alignment, obviously, philosophically, but the character of a candidate really counts. And I really loved George W. Bush for all those reasons, as a human being and just as a good person and his values and all that. And so I crossed the bridge and helped him with his reelect, and then he just stayed aboard for the rest of the ride.
Yeah, and I remember when he ran for governor, when he was governor, he was not a hardcore partisan at all. He was kind of a consensus builder. It was later, when he started beating Democrats for president, that people saw him through more of a partisan lens. But he was almost a fusion candidate for governor of Texas.
Oh, he was. In fact, part of the reason that I was attracted to him and wanted to work for him was that he had this whole compassionate conservative message, and he was very forward-leaning on education reform, which is why I got involved in the charter stuff with him, and immigration reform.
Yeah.
Ironically. So it was a very, he governed in a very bipartisan way, had this very compassionate conservative message, which I thought was terrific. And so, yes, that was very much the case, and that all kind of, went by the wayside with, starting with the recount and, all these Democrats thinking he wasn't a legitimate president. But still, even early on, he worked with Ted Kennedy to get No Child Left Behind. And then, then we know where the rest of the story went from there.
Let's say in a hypothetical, you're on a 4-hour airplane flight and the person next to you recognizes you from television or the circus or whatever and says, oh my God, you work for that horrible George W. Bush, blood for oil, on and on and on.
Yeah.
What is the one fact you wish you could tell that person to give them a fuller picture of President Bush that, some of our listeners may not know?
That's a great question. I'd say I just wish you had the chance to meet the guy. We included him as part of our Circus episode a few episodes ago when we were doing a pre-debate episode, and we wanted to show what it was like to do debate prep. So I went down to Dallas and to Crawford and talked to some of my old pals like Karen Hughes and Judd Gregg, and we got 43 included in the episode, just some kind of behind-the-scenes green room stuff, and just chatting with him. After the show, I was amazed at how many. Well, I wasn't surprised by how many. My old Republican friends all called him, so God, it was great to see him again. But I was surprised by how many my Democratic friends dialed in and said, oh my God, now I get it. What a great guy. What a, just a decent guy. I may have disagreed with his politics. Given everything that's happened in the last, number of years, there's a much warmer feeling about him. But you're right. I mean, during the middle of, Iraq and post-Iraq and all that, it was not easy being a former George W. Bush guy.
Yeah, I can imagine. I have to say, look, I haven't had many interactions with him, but I've had a few, and he's always been incredibly nice to me, and I ran a primary against him. So
yeah, he's a stand-up guy, and, on a personal level, I mean, when my wife got cancer, he was the first guy that called. When this bizarre thing that happened in the 2000 election where somebody who worked for me, we discovered had sent a tape to Al Gore, and I was under suspicion. The first call I got was from George W. Bush saying, don't worry about this, McKinnon. I love you. I'm with you, standing by you. So he's just a stand-up guy on a personal level in every way possible.
Now, Mark, one thing I'm curious about, do you consider yourself more Republican or Democrat now or firmly independent?
Yeah, listen, I get that question a lot. And my thing is, I'm hanging in here as long as I think I can keep trying to plow the field in a course correction for the party. I mean, I know I'm kind of in a weird minority. There's kind of a holdover of the old kind of Rockefeller Republican, socially progressive, fiscally conservative. But, until there's an alternative, which there isn't, I'm going to keep trying over here on the Republican side just because I've got lots of good Democratic friends like my wife. But, there's still some stuff that I really care about. Free trade, of course, which our nominee's not for. And I want to kind of get back to some of that stuff and find the guy or woman who will kind of advance those causes. And right now, if you have to put me down on either side of the line of Republican or Democrat, I still fall on the right side of the line.
Good for you. Yeah, like they say in the Hackney cliche that's true, 2 wings or you don't fly.
Yeah, I love it. That's great.
Then, after the Bush years, we're taking up to the present, and I want to ask you about the circus, and then we can delve into this train wreck of a campaign we're watching.
So after the campaign, the next thing that happened was that I had always loved McCain, and I loved McCain in 2000 when you were doing the McCain campaign. I mean, I always liked him. I was always attracted to the campaign finance message. I mean, I've been kind of ridiculously involved in that forever. Talk about specializing in steep hills and big rocks.
I know that feeling. In every presidential nomination race, I pick the guy down at the margin of error because I think he ought to be president, and then we see how far we can claw forward.
Exactly. So I was kind of the back channel guy with Weaver when all the bad shit was happening between Bush and McCain. I was the guy that could still have conversations with your team. So when all that kind of cleared away and, things got better and fences were mended and what have you, I kind of went and had, lunch with McCain over at the Senate. And I said, listen, if there's anything I can do, like mow your lawn in Sedona, I'm happy to do it. And then he said, well, thinking about running, I'll go do this. And I said, the last thing I want to do is another campaign, but if I can be on a conference call or help put the team together, I'm glad to do it, which I did. And then, as you recall, his campaign melted down largely because of the immigration issue. All the funders left, everybody quit, and me and 4 other people, including Steve Schmidt, just volunteered. We just said, we're going to see if we can help the old man get his medals back. Not with any real notion they'd ever get the nomination back. But, we love the guy. And so we went and slogged through New Hampshire for that fall, and then things came around. But I had this weird thing where at the beginning of all of that, I just said, listen, I met this guy Obama. I disagree with his politics, but I think his candidacy is good for the country. And if in this bizarre circumstance would happen where, Senator, you're nominated and Obama's nominated, I'd just be uncomfortable being the tip of the spear. And I don't think that you'd want me to be, because you don't want a guy with a soft trigger finger in the seat. And knowing that everybody would probably forget that conversation, I actually wrote it down in a memo. And so after that all happened, I walked into McCann and said, Senator, I don't know if you remember this, but here's that memo. And he was great. He hugged me and said, listen, it would be very un-McCain-like for you not to keep your word. So I had to step out, which was actually very hard because, it's blood, sweat, and tears and band of brothers. And so it was awkward, it was weird, and it was uncomfortable. So I stepped out for the general election, then just kind of saluted and went off into the sunset and kind of did my stuff. And
I know exactly what that's like because I had worked for John in 2000, and he had decided he wasn't going to run again. So I go work for Mitt Romney, and we get elected governor. We start putting the presidential campaign together, and then I get the John McCain call, hey, I'm going to run. I said, oh, I thought we talked about this. No, I remember what he said. He said, look, I can do a good job. I'm old, and I'm not going to die without trying this again. And I couldn't blame him at all. So join up, and then Weaver and Salter and everybody. And I had a huge kinship with all those guys. But I, was now the keeper of the Romney campaign. So I went to Mitt and said, look, I hate to do this to you because I know you were counting on me to do it, but I got to, I can't do it. And he said, well, what are you going to do? Go work for McCain? I go, no, I couldn't do that either. So I told both guys I was unavailable, and that retired me from 2008. And I would visit them both on the trail. I remember seeing McCain when he was traveling alone with like a Greyhound senior discount card and no money in the campaign in December in New Hampshire. And we were at the old Wayfair before they tore it down in the middle of the night, just sitting there in a couple of chairs in the lobby. There was like you guys, it was a lot you did for him because there was very little campaign left at that point. And I was encouraging him to stay in just because I said, you have a New Hampshire ticket to the lottery, and it's a great ticket. You got to play it. But anyway, so I know what it's like to walk away from a candidate in a campaign you love. I had to do it twice.
Yeah, well, we were in very similar circumstances. So anyway, that all happened. And then I just, since 2008, I didn't get involved in 2012. So I've just been kind of involved in nonprofits trying to do, money and politics reform. Again, the steep hills and big rocks routine. But I had for a long time, been really interested in this idea of producing a real-time documentary in a presidential campaign or any campaign, really. In fact, I first started pitching it in 2002, and it was originally called Smackdown in the Swamp. I was going to do the same idea in Louisiana, which I just knew the characters there, and it's such a colorful place, and I thought I could get access. I had the idea for the circus for a long time, and it just, the television business, and so it took 100 phone calls and 100 meetings. But finally, last September, Showtime said, let's do it. And it's been a ton of fun doing this because it really has done what I hoped it would do, which is to show the exciting behind-the-scenes action of a presidential campaign and kind of helps put viewers in the cockpit and see what it's like to be on a campaign or to cover a campaign. And the response has just been fantastic.
Yeah, it really captures the vibe of what it's like kind of on the road show of it all. And it's very well shot. Whoever your cinematographers are, I've met one when I was on it the second time up in Silicon Valley. But it doesn't look like cable news. You really feel like you're inside, and it's kind of artfully done. So I think under the time deadlines you guys produce it under, it's really an amazing accomplishment to do that.
Well, that's the insane part, and that's why it was hard to pitch. I mean, the television execs all got it. It was the fastest pitch ever. It's like real-time documentary. Oh, I got it. And then their second response would be, and you're going to do this in a week? Impossible.
Right.
And then they said, well, how about like quarterly or monthly? And I just, that's kind of where I drew the line. I said, it's got to, you've got, I mean, the documentary Mitt was part of an inspiration for this, by the way. It's like 6 months after the election, it was great. And everybody saw this guy and said, God, I wish we'd seen that guy during the campaign. I said, that's the point. I want to do this during the campaign so that people get a sense of these candidates and what they're like before the election, not afterwards.
And you want it to be fresh. You want people to see behind the curtain on whatever happened a few days ago.
Yes, exactly right. So my ambition was that, and hope was that junkies would like it just because it's all the stuff that we do. But also that people casually interested in politics, and by that I mean, people who may not vote, during kind of off cycles, but get interested in the presidential election, that this would be a place where, a half an hour every Sunday, they could get an entertaining, quick, loose, fun, documentary style take on the week, because they don't want to watch Meet the Press or read the New York Times, but they want to be, a little bit informed so they can go to work or school and kind of know what's going on.
Yeah, and they want the cinema verite experience of really not hearing people talk about it, but seeing it happen and have a little bit of people talking about it. What's the workflow? How do you guys grind this thing out over 7 days?
I mean, you have an appreciation for what it's like, right? Because first of all, we have to shoot a ton of stuff. I don't know what the shoot to air ratio, but it's probably something like 50-1. We have 3, sometimes 4, sometimes even 5 full-time crews, and these are big crews. You saw them. I mean, it's big cameras. Yeah. The sound equipment. It's not one-man band stuff. It's high-end stuff. So we have 60 people working on it full-time, and that's probably 30 people in the field, 30 editors back home. So we'll start like right now. I'm having a conference call about the week, trying to. And again, this is, we're sort of hostage to event. When we first did it and we got like 26 episodes, which is, twice as much as most shows do, my first thought was, oh my God, there's going to be weeks where there's just nothing happening and it won't be that interesting. Well, that hasn't happened once in this campaign.
Yeah. Thank you,
the only
Donald
problem
Trump.
has been cutting, So, we all kind of divide up, me, Halpern, and Heilemann, my colleagues, who you know well. We just kind of say, okay, McKinnon, with Clinton in Florida, Halpern with Trump in Ohio, Heilemann, let's, go do a sidebar kind of C story on voter reg somewhere else, or, some other sidebar story. And we just start cranking it out and producing as much content as we can. And hopefully, in good weeks, a lot of that's early in the week. I mean, our editors love it when there's, good stuff happening Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But then, as you know, sometimes it's flat early in the week. This is probably a good example of that this week, because none of the action really starts till the debate this week, it looks like. In which case, we're shooting Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And, I mean, this episode we did last night, we shot up. Mark was up in New Hampshire on Saturday. And, we're driving down tapes from New Hampshire late Saturday afternoon for our show Sunday.
Oh, my God. It strikes me, having kind of seen you guys on the trail, that a lot of the technique is you kind of guess, or hopefully you know where the action is. You send one of these heavy multicam portable crews there, and you just kind of get in. You kind of talk your way in or whatever, because you can't plan it that far ahead. You just throw a lot of production capacity at the location, and whichever correspondent is there and some of your very able producers kind of talk your way in, and boom, you get material, and you just do that with a lot of volume.
Exactly right. You just kind of throw it out on the field and just hope that something's happening, hope you get some special access. But, the first 2 months of this thing, I thought my head was going to explode every day, because I didn't know until literally the very last minute that we'd actually get a show on the air. It really was like trying to assemble a plane on the runway.
Oh, my God.
It was very stressful.
And when in doubt, you guys head to a diner and do an interstitial and have a meal, too. That seems to be it's smart, because that puts you on one place, too.
The funny thing was that what we knew we didn't want to do was like be in a studio, right? We didn't want it to be static and kind of, we didn't want it to look like the McNeil-Lehrer report or the McLaughlin deal. And we needed opportunity to kind of, do overviews and make, kind of anticipate or summarize what was going on. And we just, like the first episode, we went to like Katz's in New York, and we did that. And then we got this amazing and unexpected response to that part of the show. And people were like, oh, we love that. And, not only what we were saying, but like what we were eating and where we were. And so suddenly we realized we had this like whole food porn network. People who like watch the show just to see where we eat. So
I've always
kind of a
kicked that idea around to grab some of the famous campaign eating journalists and do the 10-week kind of visit the famous campaign eating dives in each state, working your way through the campaign trail.
Take Halpern with you.
Yeah, I'll bet. Jonathan Martin would be another. He knows how to swing a fork.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, he's always like telling me, barbecue in Georgia.
Exactly. The editorial, I feel bad just hearing about this for the editors. It's Friday, Saturday. The tapes are all there. Where is it done? New York? You got multiple people doing pieces of it, or how does that work?
Yeah, we have a production partner called Left Right, and they're just wizards. I mean, it just stuns me that we feed this material back in, and then we start seeing kind of early cuts of it, usually Thursday and Friday. And I'm amazed every time. It's like, how do they do this? I mean, they've got the music tracks laid in that are always amazing, and it's just pure wizardry. And I every week, even after 22 episodes, I'm still walking around the edit studio trying to go, where's the secret sauce? How are you doing this? I don't get it. It's just,
and the production polish is great. So let me ask a question that I don't want to get you in trouble with Showtime and Mr. Nevins, but what's the below the line cost of a typical episode? I'm just curious as a production guy, because that's very well employed bandwidth there.
Yeah, well, I think I can tell you that it's roughly. I tell you, it's roughly like $300,000-$400,000 per episode.
Oh, that's pretty good. Believe me, that's on a scripted hour. That's the catering and
well, I mean,
all
compared
the writers.
compared to any other scripted shows that on this network or any other one, it's pretty cheap.
Are you guys going to do the long form documentary after it with all this material you have?
Well, I'm not sure, but I mean, one thing. I mean, Nevins and Showtime love the show and they love the franchise, so they've already had discussions. How about the first 100 days of the administration, or elections in Mexico? I feel pretty much like I'm one and done. But to your point, I mean, they've got hundreds of hours of material and 26 episodes. It'd be pretty easy to just go. And cheap to cut that into a 2-hour kind of reprise, for sure.
Knowing Hollywood, I think you'll get a call. How do we repurpose all this content and do a little more commerce with it?
And by the way, I'm sure we can repurpose that under your current contract.
Yeah, exactly. That'll be the first part of the call. We're going to continue our conversation with Mark McKinnon in a minute, but first, it is time to do some commerce.
I confess, I dig learning. I read a lot of books. I surf the web. I'm a fiend for learning new stuff, because what's more fun than that? That's why I'm so gaga about the Great Courses Plus. Now, what is this? It is a great idea. They go all over the country, they find the best college professors, and they tape them doing their best lectures on a ton of different topics. Then, through the miracle of digital technology, they put all that content in a library that you can access on your laptop or smart device anywhere. Listen in your car, watch at home, whatever and whenever it fits your schedule. You can learn a lot. Now, the Great Courses Plus offers courses on just about everything, from photography to history to all the sciences. Anything you're interested in, believe me, you can find a great professor teaching a great, interesting course. I've been digging the Masters of War, History's Greatest Strategic Thinkers, which is all about grand strategy through the lens of military history. Learn how Chairman Mao did it. Pretty good accomplishment there, even though he was a commie. Or Machiavelli, or some of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Any big moment in history, you're going to find strategy, and this course specializes in explaining all that. Now, again, you want to bone up on astronomy, you want to learn all about ancient Greece, it's all there. There is a course for you, in fact, dozens of them, several hundred of these things. Now, here's the best part. I have to admit, I think attract sort of a brainiac listenership. I think we got a lot of learning nuts out there. So the offer that these guys have come up with for you is pretty cool. Here's the deal. You sign up for the first month, and for free, you get total access to their entire library. I think it's about 600 courses that you can watch anytime you want. It's like an unlimited skeleton key to go to college for the best professors ever, right from your device. Again, it's free for the first month. The way you do it is you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG. That way we get a shekel or two to pay the bills here. One more time, the website is thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG. Now, some people say, but what about the Great Courses? Well, the plus is important because that's the digital aspect. That's the part that lets you watch it on a smartphone or a laptop, whatever device you want, even on Apple TV. So go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG and start learning today. Okay, now that we got all smartened up, let's go back to the interview.
you're up front in seeing it on the trail. Have you ever seen an election anything like this?
Not even close. And, when we first came up with the name The Circus, our first reaction to it was, oh, man, that may be a little over the top. We were a little nervous that was kind of like overplaying it. And that was 2 years ago. Well, Mike, I think we're in a similar place kind of in our politics as members of the French underground. But I've been saying for a while that we need to blow up the Republican Party. And the thing that's frustrated me is that with the kind of evolution of the Tea Party and what have you, I would take a ton of heat as being kind of the squish, the Rockefeller Republican. We don't need you guys around. And I've always been, let's make this tent as big as possible. I'm happy to have you guys around. I just wish you wouldn't keep kicking my ass around. So what I thought might happen, and I actually hope was going to happen, was that there would be this experiment, which was I thought that there was a pretty good chance that Ted Cruz might win the nomination.
Yeah, we're in the same place on this. I wanted that science experiment too.
Yeah, and I wanted that to happen because then I thought, okay, you've been saying, I think, which is, that we haven't nominated anybody conservative enough. Mitt Romney wasn't conservative. John McCain wasn't conservative.
The missing millions, they're on Jupiter, but they're come home and vote if we only nominate the right guy.
Yeah, exactly, which, again, we share an opinion on that, but I got so tired of hearing it and I knew that the only way to kind of eliminate that conversation was to run the experiment. I said, okay, let's let Ted Cruz get the nomination and go lose 49 states and then
move on.
Then move on. And of course, now I think, well, God, who knows what's happened with Ted Cruz, but before the last month or so, I think there was a good chance that, that Trump will lose and that Ted Cruz would show up and say, okay, I told you so, and that he would be in a good shape for 2020. I'm not so sure anymore. I think now Mike Pence probably will be. But
yeah, can you imagine being a fly on the wall when Pence was, in his debate kind of doing the conservative religion, being a fly on the wall in the Cruz rec room? Very much an angry Dracula fit, I think, because the whole plan started to go up in smoke right then and there with Pence.
No kidding, my God. Oh, Jesus.
But you're right. There's that lane, and that lane is powerful, and that lane wants to try it. I really thought in the primary it would be, Jeb, who I was working for, and a bunch of others. We thought we could emerge and take on Cruz in the finals, but I always thought that would be uphill. And, we didn't even get to the finals. And then Trump jumped in and managed to kill all the regulars and kill Cruz, which was amusing from a train wreck point of view, but cost the party 4 years to have this battle. So now it's going to get punted down the road, and we don't move forward. Trump was expensive in more ways than just losing the general election.
No question. I mean, there's the immediate issue we're dealing with, which is the election, but then there'll be the aftermath, and I don't see any clean scenarios after the election either. I mean, I think things get potentially even more complicated because you'll have the whole, all the Trump supporters who are going to be mad at the establishment, say it's their fault that, Ryan and everybody walked and that's why we lost. And so there's a big question about, is that all Trump or can it be transferred? There's a lot of mad, angry people out there, and, somebody's going to inherit those people. And I don't know who it'll be, but they're not anxious to go hold hands with the establishment. So, it's just going to, who knows where this is going to go in the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. You always look at the voters, not the candidates, because in the end, the voters find what they're looking for. And even when Trump, is showing up at shopping malls and the old Ghostbusters thing or whatever his career will be after this, those voters will still exist, at least a big hunk of them. And they'll go shopping and somebody's going to fill the vacuum. I think we're going to have a situation like the Chinese Civil War with all these warlord armies and nobody in control. And then we're going to hit, 2018 where we're going to win for free in a bunch of places, particularly in the Senate. So there'll be this mad attempt by different factions to claim credit for that when it's going to happen anyway. And the press will be writing the great Republican comeback, but our internal problems will still be unsolved.
We're on the same page.
Depressing stuff. So you've seen Trump up close and personal. How crazy do you think he is?
Oh, my God. I mean, the thing that I think this whole thing has been is a guy who had this sort of empire, liked to be entertained as well as to entertain, kind of bored, liked this little sandbox of politics, thought it was kind of interesting, gave him a lot of attention. And then said, I'll go play over here in this sandbox for a while. I don't think he really had any intention or thought that he was going to win the primary.
Yeah.
In fact, he admitted as much to Halpern at one point. Said, I probably have a 30% chance. And then all of a sudden he started winning. It's like, well, shit, this isn't that hard. But along with that comes like the responsibility to really run a campaign, which he never did, never has, and or recognized, that you really have to have an infrastructure. But my favorite number, which I know you'll appreciate, in like the recent FEC report, I saw that he spent $400,000 on national field organizing and $1.8 million on hats.
Right.
So
right.
we're gonna test the hat strategy this election.
Yeah. No. The problem is there just aren't enough hats. If they could get more of those red hats out, everything. Wet streets would cause rain. The funny thing about Trump to me is he reminds me a lot of kind of a needy comedian because he needs a room of strangers to love him. And he takes his roadshow out there, and he has not changed the material one bit. He does kind of his act. He's very limited. A certain segment goes batshit crazy with delight over it, and that was enough. And the pre-aware title, the fact he was so well known and the cable media decided to get in business with him in the primary, that was enough. And all the grievance, he was the perfect guy. It all fit together, but then nothing changed. No campaign was built. No messaging change. He doesn't understand that he's like he's still trying to win the world's biggest Republican primary, even though he's won that. And he's just hammering away. If anything, he's narrowing. He's going even more into kind of an alt-right primary crazy town bubble now when, that is exactly what he shouldn't do, but he's just committed to it.
Yeah, and it just makes me wonder that there's, maybe those around him that are smart enough to recognize that's not actually going to win, but it's sort of a longer-term strategy
for the business.
With the business and a lot of other things kind of down the line and well past the election.
Yeah, the whole streaming network theory and all that. And that's an interesting point because most of the people around him are not campaign people. I'd say even Kellyanne Conway is barely a campaign person, the Bachmann campaign. But most of them are these kind of people in the Republican / conservative / alt-right noise for money business. Commerce is very much the glue that holds most of those cats together. And, so maybe there's a bigger plan and this thing was never really about getting any votes.
They love big conspiracies and, and I think they think that they've got some kind of a tiger by the tail and they just got to figure out what to do with the tiger.
What's funny is for a bunch of people who love conspiracies, they should step back because they are the conspiracy. They're the conspirators. They think they can hijack the party and actually, get maybe it's a commerce outcome, maybe it's voting. Right now, it looks like complete disaster. When I've turned, I've been anti-Trump forever, but I've become very hostile just to this idea he started up on now that this is a non-legitimate election because that's throwing acid on our democracy and it is toxic.
That's toxic, and that's a big problem, and that can create real destabilizing issues. And I hate it because I remember how problematic it was for George W. Bush to govern because half the country didn't think he was a legitimate president. Flash forward to Barack Obama, and thanks in good part to Donald Trump and his efforts, half the people didn't think he was born in this country, or a big number of people. So again, not legitimate. This sort of thing is intentionally feeding a notion, once again, that whoever's elected will not be a credible representative, and that just creates huge problems for our democracy at a time when we have really big problems.
Yeah, I agree. The last thing we need is more dysfunction, but here we are. So what do you think happens going forward? We're taping this about 21 days, 3 weeks yet to go. Trump must know he's losing, and he's going to flail around for a little while. But one thing we know about Trump is when he's not addressing a hall full of adoring fans in a state he probably shouldn't be in, he's watching cable news. And cable news right now is a death march for Trump. Bad polling, every commentator. You can tell Trump's going, batshit about it because of his Twitter feed. What do you think he tries to change up anything going forward, or he just pounds away? Because 3 weeks is forever, as you well know.
It is forever, and it seems like all it's going to be is sex and emails. But you're right. But on the other hand, I think he's got Bannon and others around him, and I think the strategy from here on out is just, if they go low, we go lower. We'll do the Viking strategy. We'll just burn the boat so we can't retreat, and just incinerate the whole thing and just see if there's anybody left standing.
Yeah, it's amazing because normally the base Republican number is about 42. Maybe he can take it lower.
Yeah,
you know,
that'll be the experiment that we're testing for sure.
Oh, it's depressing, thin gruel indeed. What do you think his debate strategy will be? I actually thought, I talked about this last week with Axelrod, that there was a moment where she could have said, I'm not going to give this predator a platform. We've heard what he has to say. And she could have pulled the old Nixon 72 and pulled the plug in the debate. A little too strategically aggressive for her.
Yeah.
It looks like they're going to slog their way through. It'll be Chris Wallace, who's pretty tough. So any predictions on what'll happen?
Well, the one thing that we know is that due to all the salacious stuff from last week, that a lot of issues from the emails has not been really litigated or even talked about much. I mean, and part of that's Trump's fault for just, following all the glittering balls. But, if you were counseling him or I was, and we had all this, WikiLeaks stuff out there and, and issues, where there's admissions about where she really is on sort of these fundamental issues like trade and what have you. And you got Chris Wallace out there, who's a pretty fair guy down the middle. There's just a lot of stuff in those speeches, in the emails that people just don't know about. I mean, they kind of heard vaguely about emails and about speeches, but there's some very good stuff. I mean, there's a lot of grist for the mill that he could just crank out and just keep her on her heels the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if this were a normal campaign as opposed to bizarro campaign, that would be what's happening. Because you can tell people don't want her. I mean, she really is the voter dog food the dogs don't want. I mean, she's running against a frothing lunatic, and, it's still a 6-point, 7-point race, best case. So it would be that, but Trump just seems to be built to get in his own way. The button on his head is so big. And in the first debate, she proved she could really push it. Fred Trump gave you $14 million. You're not really rich.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think she'll double down on the Putin stuff. The problem is she, like Trump, tends to go into the defensive crouch pretty easily. So if Wallace may put her there, it's just, can Trump ever exploit it, or will he just spin himself into craziness on some of these other issues? Particularly, he's going to get really grilled on these women. And he clearly shows very little remorse or very little understanding that he made a mistake. I thought his tape was like a hostage video, where Kellyanne had the Luger in his head and he had to read it, but you could tell he didn't mean a damn word of it, except for the second half when he got into Clinton.
No, the only thing missing was the jumpsuit.
He was trying to blink innocent in Morse code if we'd watched closely.
Yeah, but I think for this one, he just says, listen, all the women's stuff, we talked about that last week. I said all I've got to say. Let's talk about what we haven't talked about, which is all these emails and leaks about the speeches and what Hillary Clinton really thinks about voters in America.
Right. Now, that's definitely the play, but it requires, like every Trump play, the ability for Trump to coherently prosecute an idea and not fall into the web of his narcissism and start to...
Right. Well, I think that's why she decided to show up for the third debate.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's totally it. They figure give him a mic, a little more structure, and let him be himself. And again, you've got Bannon in his ear walking him down saying, remember, open with the rape, whatever advice he's getting is crazy advice.
Here's another Clinton accuser.
Yeah. It's just, okay, we're holding the ghost of Vince Foster. That's the big finish. We brought a professional medium in, and we're going to channel him through the debate audience. He's going to make a statement. Oh, I think, my God, they're probably on Google looking for mediums right now. It's that bad.
That's perfect.
So how are you going to cover this thing for the circus? You guys will be at the debate, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I'm literally going to get on a call here as soon as we hang up to just figure out how we're going to do this week. Once again, it's kind of a lot of unknowns, and we got to try and figure out, how do we make it different and interesting, and we're not quite sure yet. I'm trying to figure out an interesting way to get at the whole Russian hack, Julian Assange angle, including maybe seeing if we can track down some interesting people to talk to.
I think it's time to send Halperin Heilman to Moscow.
Yeah.
Let them knock on some doors at Lubyanka. See what.
Exactly. That'd be great. David, we're up in the budget.
So how long will the circus run through? When do you declare is it you do election night? Is that the last thing, or what's the current setup?
Sunday after the election will be the last show.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Well, it's really, every time I'm on the thing, every political hack and junkie I know sends me an email. So I think it has found its audience and people really enjoy it. So good job getting a camera inside the wacky world of American politics during a particularly wacky year.
Well, as wacky as it is, I've loved doing it. And in fact, a lot of people watch it say, as crazy as this all is, I seeing what the candidates have to go through in the campaigns and the families, I understand how hard this is, and it's actually, despite it all, a noble process, and it's important and appreciate what we're doing.
So I have one last mega question for you that I'm sure you get from Circus watchers at all hours by email, but I'll ask it on behalf of a grateful nation here. Where do we get one of the hats? Give me the hat story.
Oh, well, it's called the Open Road Stetson, and this is the hat that LBJ used to wear. It's the hat you see the Texas Rangers, especially in like the old Ruby Oswald shots. It's that hat. My dad used to wear one. My dad did some ranching for a while, and he always had there was a dad closet that had all this dad cool stuff in it, and I used to go in there. But the coolest thing in there was the Stetson, and I couldn't wait until I was old enough to have my own. And there's not a picture of me growing up. I don't have a hat on. I just love hats, and I always loved that Open Road Stetson because it's not like a goofy cowboy hat. It's kind of a dress hat. It's kind of a little more formal. It's got a thinner brim, and it just looks like kind of a dress hat. And so
it's great. I own one. I have to admit, I love the Stetson. It's like a ranch hat that's a little bit citified. It's the one you wear into town.
It's the ranch hat you'd wear into town. That's right. Exactly. That's perfect.
Who's your Stetson supplier? We'll do a free plug for somebody here.
Miller Hats, man. Miller Hats of Houston, Texas. MillerHats.com. And the great thing about them is that I love here's another thing. If you're really a hat person, you understand there's an important distinction between the straw and the felt.
Yep.
Like straw is for late May to September, and then you throw on the felt once it gets below about 60. And Miller Hats is one of the only operations that I'm aware of that makes a bunch of different styles of the straw open road.
Oh, okay. Miller Hats. I will check them out. I have not procured from there. In fact, what I think I'm going to do, if it's all right with you, is we're going to purchase a fine Stetson from Miller. I'm going to send it to you for an autograph, and we're auctioning it off here to help pay for some of the overhead.
Awesome. I love it.
It'll be a special one for our, believe me, non-profit Radio Free GOP.
Well, I hope you can cover the cost of the Stetson.
No, probably not, but it's a worthy thing. Anyway, Mark, I really want to congratulate you on the Circus, and thank you for doing the podcast.
Hey, Michael, I always appreciate it. You're one of our favorite people in politics. Keep kicking it hard.
It's number one for rumors and fun. It's Resistance Podcasting, Radio Free GOP.
Okay, that'll do it for this podcast. I've got to pack up the gear and get on the move. Up there are the sirens. They're on my trail. But with 3 weeks to go, they're slowing down a little bit. The show trials are coming. Maybe the sirens will be on our side. I want to end with a special salute to all the young campaign staffers on the Republican or even on the Democratic side. I think we have a pretty big listenership in that area. Don't give up, Republicans. Keep fighting. Thank you for what you're doing. Campaign work is honorable. Not everybody, in fact, nobody else is as bad as a Trump. So fight for the cause. Get your senator or congressman or assemblyman or assemblywoman or whoever it might be reelected, and keep listening to Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance. Why? Because in the end, victory will be ours. Talk to you next week.
Radio Free GOP, the resistance sound all campaign long.
This has been Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance, with your host, Mike Murphy.